This video is all about painting a really cool and atmospheric environment. You'll see exactly how to create it step by step. My name is Victor, I work as a concept artist, so let's get started. This time around, the goal was to create a moody and sort of mysterious scene. I wanted something that feels a little bit distant, foggy, and full of atmosphere. I was imagining maybe some tall, almost monolithic towers rising in the background, maybe a meeting between a few characters, something small that could contrast nicely with the massive shapes behind them. Right away, while sketching, this told me the scene had some potential, and if you'll stick around by the end, you'll see how it all comes together. The first thing you always want to do is gather your references. I pulled together some examples of rocky shorelines, some fog layers, and a few simple tower shapes. This gives you a visual guide so you're not inventing everything from scratch, and you can stay grounded in reality, and whenever you need some realistic details, you can pull them off your reference board. Now, while you're sketching, try to organize the big shapes. I'm grouping them together so they read as a structure in the background. You don't need to be super precise at this stage, just make sure the drawing is good enough for you to understand where your painting is heading. Once the composition feels like it has a chance, start shifting things a bit. Sometimes if something feels off, that instinct is usually right, so keep nudging things until the sketch feels promising. And when you're satisfied with the line work, you can move on. Now you can start putting down local colors for each element. I always begin with the background because it sets the mood, then I block in the silhouettes, all the shapes I sketched earlier. To make things easier on yourself later, keep these elements on separate layers if you want. That way you can scale them, shift proportions, or push them around if the composition needs later. Trust me, that flexibility becomes really helpful sometimes. By the way, if this is the kind of artwork you want to create, I'm putting together a full learning program that walks you through it from the ground up. It's a clear step-by-step system for beginners with lessons, demos, and homework, so you always know what to practice next. Don't miss a huge discount and the bonus live sessions. Take a look and get started today. These rock formations and all the shapes you're seeing right now are not final at all. They're just my first attempt based on what I have in mind and on the reference I gathered. So don't worry if something looks strange or out of place in the beginning. We'll adjust it and figure it out step by step. Now I'm starting to figure out the clouds. Grab any soft brush you like, preferably one with a little bit of texture. With just a few broad strokes, you can design simple cloud shapes that read instantly without going into detail. When you place them behind the towers, you start getting that layered and atmospheric mood. It's always surprising how quickly clouds shift the entire feeling of the painting, and this is also a great moment to think about how much detail you want in the sky. For the foreground, try to design some interesting shapes. I want this area to feel cool and also mysterious. So I'm thinking of a shoreline, maybe with shallow water weaving through some rock formations, for example, something winding and organic that leads your eye into the scene. I think that could work well, and it sets up a nice contrast with the tall, hard-edged towers in the distance. And also don't forget to download the free brush pack. You can find the link in the description. Now, let's describe the form and define the lighting scenario. Think about what value you want your shadow areas to have. Place a rough block in, adjust it as needed. Nothing is locked in yet, everything can change later. At this stage, you're still refining the composition and the overall value. And the overall value matrix that will guide the rest of the painting. For the mountains in the background, I'm adding a little shading, nothing too harsh, just a soft shift between light and dark to suggest form. I want them to feel distant and atmospheric as well, and not crisp or sharp. One thing I knew from the beginning is that I wanted a thick layer of fog covering the base of the towers. Fog always helps you create depth, mood, and separation between layers. Adjust the focus you see fit, give it maybe some personality, play around with the edges. You can even use a smudge brush to stretch out the edges so it doesn't look too uniform or too copy-paste. Once it feels good enough for now, you can move on. Try to also spend some time on the foreground and middle ground. There's a lot of surface here that needs description and shape clarity. Pick a value you like. Don't be afraid to go darker. This area sits in front of the fog, so naturally the shadows will be stronger. I'm roughly describing how I think the edges of these cliffs and rocks look. Hard angles, some soft erosion. This is where your imagination and references start blending together. After the first draft pass on the right side, I move to the other shapes. I'm adding some color variation, maybe a layer of reddish sand near the bottom could look cool. That could work well and adds a nice warm cool contrast with the cooler fog and sky. I'm also thinking about adding a structure or some ruins between the fog layer and the foreground. This will hopefully add more depth and give the viewer mid-ground information to latch onto. If you have a strong foreground contrast, a strong background, but an empty middle, it's usually not good enough. So you need that second layer layer to connect everything. This is also where silhouette design becomes really important. So as I was painting, there was something bugging me a little, and I'm not totally happy with the placement of those distant towers. The problem is they sit almost perfectly in the center of the space between the left edge of the canvas and the mid-ground cliff. That creates a stiff 50-50 proportion, and usually if you want a composition that feels a little bit more alive, you want to avoid perfect symmetry or perfect splits like this, unless you're really deliberate and that's what you're going for, but that's not the case here. So I adjust their placement a bit to add more natural rhythm, and this is a good reminder. If something feels slightly wrong early on, don't ignore it. Fixing it now saves some time later. Now, try to refine the forms for the rest of the environment, place shadows to add depth. In the middle ground near the tower, you can adjust the shape of the ruins and add maybe some fog between objects to separate them even more. I'm also trying to adjust the height of the land so the connection doesn't feel so abrupt between the middle ground and the background. These little shape adjustments help the painting breathe and create some nice transitional areas. Now it's time to figure out the water plane. A good starting point is to use the value that's close to the value of the sky. In this scenario, that makes sense because reflective surfaces often mimic the colors above them, but I prefer making it slightly darker so the water feels murkier. Once you have the base value, add some subtle reddish reflections from the nearby elements and some foam, some horizontal streaks, small waves. These dynamic lines help the water feel a bit more alive. You can also go back and define the towers a bit more. Don't get stuck in one place for too long. Move around the painting, add information in passes. Your painting will develop more naturally this way. Now, let's figure out how to treat the texture and lighting on the lid side of the tower. I'm playing around with the mixer brush a bit, introducing some patterns and textures to suggest material and age. We also want to make sure that the surfaces read correctly, so I'm adding small value shifts to planes that face upward. Some contrast in the background helps reinforce the tower shapes. Closer to the camera, I'm trying to introduce more color into the scene. I'm pushing the reds a bit, making sure the terrain layers properly. Maybe there are some minerals in the rocks that give them that warm tone. Little storytelling details and design details like this help sell the world. Some decisions need to be made regarding the visibility and contrast of the towers. I think I'll remove a small fog patch and adjust the values. Some shadow shapes also need tweaking. I want to make sure that towers have clarity and are not fighting with the sky. This is definitely one of those paintings where you have to address the composition later on in the process, and that's completely normal. If you keep noticing clarity issues, don't force things. Fix them. Darken some areas, simplify the clouds, clean up the noise, maybe create some resting zones for the viewer. And be careful with the tower shapes as well. It's easy to accidentally give them odd proportions when you're focused on other things. Redesign them where necessary, keep them visually interesting but readable. Now I'm trying to add some details to the darker areas as well, maybe some windows, a few openings. Nothing too fancy, just enough to hint at function. These little touches go a long way. Do the same for the rest of the buildings and forms. Then let's look at the foreground silhouettes again. You should start by refining them a little, adjust the colors. I'm not too worried about their face. At this distance they don't need detail, just a hint of skin tone is enough. Later I'll adjust their values again to make sure they stand out. I'm also adding more color to the clothes of the main character in the foreground. The characters in the background get some attention too. First, improving their silhouettes, then giving hints of what they might be wearing, enough to tell the story without over detailing. Alright, now let's have a look at the final image. I made sure to add variation to the shadows. I pushed the contrast in a few areas to help readability, and also I removed some of the gray that was dulling parts of the image, and I made sure the composition feels clear and readable. Thanks so much for watching all the way till the end. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something useful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing, it helps a ton, and I'll see you in the next one, coming very soon.